Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jack Beasley. I am a freelance sports photographer and videographer in the Phoenix, Arizona metro area. Today, I'm going to describe for you how I like to set up my Nikon Z8 and Z9 for sports videography. Let's get into it. Hey, before we get started, if you're interested in having your sports photos reviewed by myself in an upcoming video, send your photos, say 3 or 4 of them, to photo review at ProtonME, photo review at ProtonME. And I'll get to them, I'll take a look at them. Depending on the quantities I get, I'll include them in an upcoming video. With that said, let's get going on the best settings for Nikon Z8 and Z9, same sensors, same menus, at least as of right now, and how I like to set them up for sports video. All right, so let's get going. First, we're gonna go to the video recording menu. I'm gonna take you down the line here, all the different settings that I use, and then I'll include an Excel spreadsheet in the, and I'll link it down in the description below, and you could download this yourself so you don't have to write all this business down. All right, so extended menu banks, on, storage folder, whatever you want. I just left it alone. File naming, I like to, my different cameras, I name them differently. So the Z9, it's J for Jack, 9, and then this is one of 2. So this is number 1. Destination is which, as far as it's either 1 or 2, depending on which slot you want to go to. I just happen to pick 1. So let's get into file type. Now, you have lots of different options here. From NRAW, which is like raw photos, ProRes RAW, ProRes 422, H.265 10-bit, H.265 8-bit, and H.264 8-bit. I like to shoot at H.265 10-bit N-Log. Why? Well, I just don't need all the higher quality above that. And the files get massive. And anything below that, you're setting yourself up with a lower quality, which is harder to grade when you get into post. If I were to make a comparison between SDR and N-Log, it's sort of like JPEG versus RAW with still photos. Not quite the same, but close. N-Log has a very flat look to it, and it's much easier to grade than SDR. You can do a lot more with it. There's just a lot more data to work with N-Log, just like RAW versus JPEG. So when I can, I use N-Log. So up next is frame size and frame rate. So let's talk about this a little bit. Again, Z8, Z9 have a lot of different options for you. With H.265, you can go up to, let's see, well, you can go to all the way to 8K at 30p or 4K at 120p. So for sports, I either like to shoot at 24 frames per second or 120 frames per second, depending on what's going on. If it's just a talking head where I'm sitting there talking to somebody, it'll probably be 24 frames per second. If I'm shooting a lot of action, I want to shoot at 120 frames per second because what happens is it's much easier to slow it down in post and get some nice, creamy, slow motion action in your videos. With 24 frames per second, you have a lot less to work with. It's harder to stretch it out. You have to have more sophisticated software to slow it down in post. So for action, I like to shoot 120 frames per second. So video quality, this is really for NRAW. I'm not shooting in NRAW, so it's kind of, neither here nor there. Image area, FX, I like to shoot in FX. Rarely do I shoot in DX. I might want to turn on the DX crop just in case I accidentally push that button and know I'm in DX. But other than that, I usually shoot in FX to get the full frame, all those pixels I could possibly use. Extended oversampling, I always turn it on, just gives higher quality. ISO sensitivity settings. So let's talk about this a little bit. Now with N-Log, you really want to work with 2 ISOs, 800 and 4000. 800 is the base ISO for N-Log, but Nikon cameras have 2 base ISOs, 800 and 4000. So for daylight photos, I take it off auto ISO, and I set it on 800 and I just go with it. And you can see right here, ISO sensitivity, the base value is 800. Now you can set it for all these other ISOs that you see right here. But Nikon cameras, Z8, Z9, and some of the other ones I think, have 2 base ISOs, 800 and 4000. Those 2 ISOs are where you get the least amount of noise when you're shooting video. There's all sorts of tests that have been done on this. I'll link some videos below where people have tested it and shown it. But if you're going to shoot during the day, I shoot at 800 with N-Log. And at night, low low lighting conditions, I'll set it on 4,000. And then I'll adjust aperture to get my exposure in correctly. So when we get to white balance, it's really set for conditions. Here it is at auto ISO. I might do that under, changing the lighting conditions like at night or indoors where it changes on a regular basis. But if it's outside and it's fixed and it's not changing a lot, nice good sunlight, I'll just set it on, direct sunlight or natural light auto. I know a lot of people will say, no, you should just pick that white balance and correct it in post. I found, for the most part, auto ISO works fine, especially in poor lighting conditions where it changes on a regular basis. I've found it works really well, and I trust it. It's rarely failed me. But however, I'm telling you, there's people out there who will say, no, pick one and then adjust it in post. All right, moving on, set picture control. This only works in SDR. We're in shooting N-Log, so it's grayed out. Manage picture control. Yes, you can make adjustments to your picture control again, but this is only for SDR. It doesn't have anything to do with N-Log. HLG quality, we're using N-Log, not HLG. Active D-lighting is turned off. It only works in SDR. High ISO noise reduction only works in SDR. So one of the benefits of using SDR in the camera is, instead of N-Log, is it'll do some noise reduction for you as opposed to doing it in post with N-Log. Vignette control, standard, I put it on normal. Diffraction compensation, I turn it on. Auto distortion control, turn it on. Skin softening, grayed out because it's only an SDR thing. Portrait impression balance, not really worried about that in sports photography, so it's grayed out because it needs to be an SDR for that. Video flicker reduction, I turn it on auto. It'll determine if it's a 50 hertz or 60 hertz. I never have any problems. Turn it on auto, seems to work fine. High frequency flicker reduction, this is if you get banding. I don't normally use it. I haven't really experienced the need to use it. I'm sure it's out there. They put it in there for a reason. I just turn it off because when it's on and you're adjusting your shutter speed, it's in very tiny little increments, which drives me crazy. So I just turned it off. I haven't felt the need to use it. Metering, I use matrix. Focus mode, it all depends on what you're doing. So generally with focus mode, I will either use autofocus continuous, where I'm actually controlling the autofocus with the back button. And in this case, I'm also using the wide small for AF area mode. Another option is to put it on full-time autofocus and let me down here, auto area autofocus. In that case, the camera's gonna do the work for you, which may be good or bad. Depends on what you're doing. I personally like, for run and gun, I kind of like to use autofocus continuous where I control it, just like I do with still photos. My personal opinion. Autofocus subject detection options, I set it for people. Vibration reduction, I turn on the vibration reduction. It helps significantly in reducing jitter as I'm moving it around. I'm doing run and gun, and it helps reduce it. It's not perfect, but it helps to reduce it. Microphone sensitivity, I turn it to auto. Attenuator on, frequency response on. So with this microphone stuff and recording, normally I'm actually using an outside microphone, not the built-in one, although this does affect it. Headphone volume, time code, I don't really use that. It's really, it depends if you're using multiple cameras. External control, HDMI, I turn it on because I use it. High-res zoom, not something I normally use. It's a feature in the camera itself. I don't normally use it. And then auto capture, not something I'm normally set up to do. I'm usually handheld. It's not fixed. I'm not waiting for something to cross the plane, but it's there if you need it. So there you have it, the video recording menu. The next thing we want to go to is the custom settings bank. Custom settings menu, and we're actually going to scroll down here to video. So customize the I menu, that's really all up to you, whatever you prefer, what works for you. Want to go to the custom controls, same thing. It depends on what you want to set on your camera, and it's going to be different for the Z8 and the Z9. Control lock, this allows you to lock certain features in, the shutter speed, the aperture, focus point. Again, not something I normally use, so I don't set it. Limit area, autofocus mode, you could uncheck these depending on which area mode you don't want to use or use. I just leave them on all myself. Focus mode restrictions, I say none. I might want to use something. so I just leave it alone. Autofocus speed. So I like my autofocus speed the way I shoot, faster than slower. So I crank it all the way up. Autofocus tracking sensitivity, I just kind of leave that alone. I haven't had real problems with it. High res zoom speed, we talked about that earlier. Not something, a feature I normally use. Assign power zoom buttons. It depends on the lens you're using. Again, I don't really normally use power zoom. Fine ISO control. You can do it in 1/6 of a stop if you so choose. Extended shutter speeds, I turn them on. View assist, I like view assist. I like it to show me what I'm getting in the viewfinder. Zebra pattern, let's talk about this a little bit. So you can set up the zebra pattern in a lot of different ways. So you could set it for off. You could set it for to show you highlights. You could set it for midtones. And basically what this does is it helps you to determine if you're overexposed, if you're at middle gray. This is what I would tell you. If you turn it on, say you want to go for highlights, I have found that I like it on 245. 245 for the highlights. That seems to work well. And I've seen other tests that show that that seems to work well. The midtone range should actually be +5. It should actually be around 95. Let's move it down to 95. So that is a good mid-tone range. It gets you to 18% gray. So if you're using this pattern, say you have it set on the highlight threshold, if you're overexposed, you'll see a little zebras showing the overexposed areas. If you put it on the mid-tone, if you're correctly exposed, you'll actually see the little stripes, the zebra stripes, in those areas that are mid-tone, 18% gray. Limit zebra pattern tone range. I'm going to say no restrictions. Grid type, personal opinion. I set it on 3x3. Again, something I don't normally use. Let's talk about brightness information display. I have it set on histogram. You could also do it on waveform. You could do it on large waveform. If you do it on histogram, which I kind of prefer, basically you want to expose slightly to the right without it clipping on the far right when you're shooting N-log. Half prints to cancel zoom. I got it off because I never use it. Custom monitor shooting display. This is how I've got it set up. Again, this is all kind of dependent on you. And because I shoot both still and video, I prefer to set my monitor displays very similar to my monitors, very close to what I see in the eyepiece. And I try to do video and photos very similar to one each other, so I'm not hunting around. Now, there are differences between the two of them. Obviously, photo is different than video, but I try to get as many of the settings the same as possible between still photos and video, so I don't get confused. Custom viewfinder. Again, this is how I like to set it up. You can set it up any way you want to. You have a lot of different options, but this is the way I like to do it. And then red record frame indicator. Yeah, I like to see the little red frame around the outside when it is actually recording. All right, there you go, folks. Quick, down and dirty on how I like to set up my Z8 and Z9. Settings are exactly the same for both for sports video. I'm curious if you are using a Z8 or Z9 for sports video, how are you doing it different? This is just my personal way I like to do it. You may like to do it something different. So I'm curious what other people do and why they do it the way they do it. In the meantime, once again, if you want those still photos reviewed in an upcoming video, photo review at proton.me. And if you got something out of this video, which I hope you did, please click that like, hit that subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.